Hi, y'all. We're excited to have you here. I want to welcome you to Flatiron School's Tech in 20. Tonight's Anatomy of a Product Designer. Tech in 20 is our newest monthly storytelling event where we cover hot topics within the tech industry and spread knowledge through short, engaging talks. My name is Corey Mickelson, and I am the Marketing Events Coordinator here at Flatiron School. A big part of my job is hosting free introductory workshops that focus on our four disciplines: software engineering, data science, cybersecurity, and product design, along with these tech talks like this evening's event. So a quick reminder for tonight's event, we will be saving all of our questions until the end of the event, but feel free to drop them in the Q&A as they come up. We'll also be using the chat to drop links, so make sure you use that little blue button at the bottom and switch that from host and panelists to everyone. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our host for the evening, Matt Donovan. He is the Director of Product Design here at Flatiron School. Take it away, Matt.
Hey, thanks, Corey. Good to see you guys. Great to be here. When Corey and I were chatting about what this event could look like, we discussed kind of like all these different paths that product designers take and where they start from, and how do you disentangle those things, and how do you think about what your career path might look like distinctly. And so I want to just spend some time talking about what I've seen, I guess, throughout the couple of decades that I've been doing this at this point. And I'll try and leave a fair amount of time at the end for questions. I'll tell a handful of stories, but I'm going to share my screen so y'all can kind of see a little presentation here. Before I get into like the anatomy of a product designer, I think it's worth just pausing and talking about like what it even is. What the heck is product design? And so I'm gonna just work for the sake of this presentation with a really simple definition, and that is that if a product is essentially like something that we sell, then product design is really just trying to render or show what we intend to sell in different layers of abstraction at different points in the customer journey. But our job as product designers is to synthesize information from a handful of different parts of the business and package that up together to help everybody kind of get on the same page and understand what it is we're trying to make. And so the way I kind of get down to this pretty it might it might be a disservice of a definition, but I think it'll serve us well, at least in this conversation, is starting with a definition of design from Don Norman's book, The Design of Everyday Things, which is that design is the rendering of intent. I once was asked to talk about what I did to my daughter's fourth grade class at school, and I figured that this definition would like not land on them, and so I kicked some things back and forth with my daughter, and we landed on design is just showing what you think we should make at the end of the day. And so if that's the case, then product design is showing what you think we should sell, which kind of begs a question, which is, how do you know what we should make? Or how do you know what we should sell? Like how do you come to these conclusions? And so what I have here is a simple Venn diagram of some basic pieces of a product. And so I'll kind of start with them and then I'll describe each of them and then kind of go around and explain where design comes into each of these. So first of all, viability is simply understanding, is this something that can make money? Is the feature that we're talking about in this digital product, this web application, or this new community we're building, or in a website or a mobile app that we're making, is the app itself, is the feature that we're working on, or are the pieces of whatever project we might be discussing that we want to work on, is there a business case behind those? Can we connect the dots that if we do A plus B, equals money? And so that's a piece of product design. That is data that you will engage with. That is information that you will have to synthesize. There are business goals that you'll have to absorb and understand as a product designer. If we move over to feasibility, feasibility is, if we're talking about the digital world of product design, which I'm just going to kind of focus on for this conversation, then we're talking about things like software engineering, right? We're thinking about whether or not there are frameworks out there that already do the feature or the thing that we think that we should build. We're talking about whether or not an area of our code base that we're thinking about working on is really sticky, or whether it's pretty cut and dry and is only supposed to do a specific thing. Um, to get maybe even simpler, I guess we might just be talking about simple things like HTML and CSS, just front end web languages that kind of ultimately are what the customer, your end user, will consume on the client side of the experience in their web browser. So do we know enough to know whether what we think we ought to do is actually doable or is it just too hard and therefore too expensive? And then the third piece of this, desirable, I think, is where a lot of us as product designers come in. I think that we tend to gravitate towards this area of this Venn diagram. We tend to be professionals with taste, right? Like maybe it's as simple as whenever you make a slide deck, it always looks nice. You kind of have a sense of what people like, I think. And so on the one hand, there is something to be said for people who just sort of naturally pick out that data out of the world and get what people like. On the other hand, this includes a lot of things like user research and customer research and product research and understanding whether or not what we think we ought to do is even something that our customers, our users, our people would want from us, or that they would need. And so then you're getting into a whole realm of discipline around research and that sort of thing that helps us understand the data that isn't immediately obvious, that helps us understand better the type of data that we just can't count, that's a little bit more qualitative, which is really important because I think we tend to over-index as people, just as humans in general, on quantitative information, on the stuff that we can count, just because it feels concrete and objective, and it is. But we shouldn't undervalue the qualitative stuff, the stuff that's a little bit more ephemeral, a little more amorphous, a little harder to kind of get your teeth into. So those are kind of like the three pieces of a product. It has to be viable, that can go to market, essentially. It needs to be viable, it needs to be feasible, and it needs to be desirable. As a product designer, you will likely kind of come in around the desirable piece. You'll be working on things that have already been vetted to be viable, right? Like as a more junior product designer, it's not your job necessarily to determine what it is we ought to make, but it's going to be your job to understand what it is your bosses or the leaders on your team think that we should make, or the people that are already working on the things that you're kind of coming in and supporting, and those types of things. You're going to need to understand to a degree what is feasible within just technology in general. So there is a little bit of understanding like HTML and CSS and that sort of thing. And if I am trying to show something in a mock-up, how do I know that it's feasible to go do? I think there's an element of being conversant around software engineering for product designers in particular that gives them more leverage because they can design things out of the gate that they know are feasible, and you don't kind of have to have that back and forth. Although it's a learning experience, and early on there will be. Early on, it's more that an engineer would be telling you, hey, within the constraints of whatever has been spec'd out in terms of a viable project here, or whatever is being pitched to our project team in terms of a goal to go accomplish or a problem to go solve, and here are our parameters. Here's what's feasible. Here are the things that we could do. I'm going to tell you, junior product designer, that like we shouldn't worry about updating these 5 things because within, the time frame that we have and the resources that we have and what we know about what's really doable, this is kind of the direction we should go down. Help us see within those constraints what it is that we could go make. And then on the desirable side, I think that what is really a lot of fun for a lot of new product designers is engaging with things like user research for the first time and getting a better and better handle on how do I know what people want, and starting to develop essentially a reflex that reacts to just assumptions about people's motivations, to where you kind of start to say, well, but do we know that or do we just think that? Because it feels like we're saying we know something that is just from our experience, but I don't know that I've ever heard any of our users complain about this thing or say that they would want this, or have I seen them, in a large scale, engage in some of the behaviors that you're talking about in the application or whatever. And so I think that there is an aspect of understanding things like Google Analytics and being able to track, Hotjar, like heat map type data on your web page and see how people interact with it and that sort of thing, to go back and look at the designs that you've created and see, oh, is what I made desirable? So those are essentially the three parts. That's roughly how you would engage with those three aspects of the product as a designer. And so I'm also going to just I don't have a slide for this, I guess, but I'll just throw out there that I'm going to assume that also empathy is a big part of being a product designer, as is curiosity. And so I think that empathy and curiosity, in a lot of ways, are sort of the fuel that drives high leverage product designers to become more so as they mature throughout their career. And we can maybe get more into that during the Q&A, because otherwise I feel a tangent coming. But what I'll say is that when you first kind of, oopsie daisies, when you first start, there's a quote coming, when you first start in your career, your job as a product designer, and maybe you're leaning in more towards this desirable ring, you will become of greater value to your team, and you'll gain more leverage in your career the more you start becoming conversant in these other pieces of this diagram. So let's say I've started my career as a product designer this year, and started on January 1 or something like that. And so far, I've done a bunch of user research. I could actually maybe do some of that on my own at this point. And maybe I come from a software engineering background. So I actually have a really great handle on what's feasible. I might have a better handle than anyone on my product design team, actually, in terms of what's feasible given my background. But I don't have a great handle on how to prioritize those things. So that becomes important, because when I'm designing a solution, if I can have a sense of appetite for a certain type of solution, knowing that this would be a user experience improvement. Let's talk about something like, improving a customer profile view or something. Think of like a social media profile, and you're logging in and just whatever you see, right? And so there might be some things that we can do, but we have to consider, what is our company's appetite to solve whatever problem it is on the screen in order to improve it. And I think that a lot of times, especially folks with a strong engineering and design capability, will actually lean too far in the efficient direction, or like in the very, very scrappy direction. And instead of thinking about things holistically in terms of the leverage we might get out of them, they'll want to crank out quick, small, tiny little things just to test. And that is can be beneficial in its own right. But sometimes it's worth stepping back a little bit and asking about the larger problem that we're trying to solve for the business, say. Even though we might have a decent handle on what our users' needs would be, is this something that we could scale? Is this something that is actually going to require more resources for it? Is there going to be somebody that has to manage this thing that's happening? There's just like a lot of other variables to consider, and it's a good place to become more and more conversant. Flip that, let's say you are more like an MBA and you're coming into a product design role, and you have a lot of experience sort of managing the revenue side of this, the viability side of this, and you've come to this because you have a sense of like what people want, maybe. Uh, Conversely, to the person with software engineering experience already, it behooves you to become more and more conversant and more knowledgeable about how these things are actually created. Because then when you're designing solutions, it's kind of like a shorthand. Rather than reinventing the wheel over and over and over again, you can sort of like pick off the frameworks that already exist in your mental toolkit in terms of feasible solutions. Or it might just be that you can speak in a shorthand with engineers and don't have to work through so much fidelity to show them what it is you think we could make, because a simple sketch with the right words would do the job. And so throughout your career, the better and better and better you get at all three of these things, the more and more leverage you create, just for yourself, certainly, but for whatever team you're working on, for whatever project you might be working on, because you can make really educated decisions. Basically, it helps you avoid stupidity on a number of different fronts. This getting better at these things does not guarantee that you won't make mistakes. It doesn't guarantee that your ideas will always be the right ones. But what it does certainly create an environment for is one where you're going to avoid really sort of like dumb, high impact mistakes in your career. And I think that it will also create a lot of efficiency in terms of just getting your ideas out to market. Because before you start having to evangelize those things, or however in your organization, ideas sort of come to fruition, you'll know what to bring to that conversation already. You'll know the people to include in that conversation. You'll have an understanding of the questions that might come at you in terms of, well, in order to believe that it would be worth doing that, I'd have to understand that, there's XYZ already in place in terms of some frameworks out there that we could use in terms of just a plug and play, or that their API, has enough flexibility for us to work with and accomplish the things we want to, and we're not going to run into roadblocks. Or conversely, if I'm coming more from like the business side of things, I might just lost my train of thought a little bit there, but I think if I'm coming from the business side of things, I am able to already sort of talk about why we might do this right now. Like talking about things like opportunity cost and stuff like that. So, that is, in my mind, the anatomy of a product designer in a nutshell. But I think at this point, probably open it to questions.
Looks like we have one in the chat. It says, when coming up with ideas for designing products for clients, do product designers also narrow down and focus on the pros and cons?
I think it sort of depends on. Well, yeah, actually, I guess without even really knowing the nuance of your question, I think I could answer yes. I wanted to ask more what types of projects and what types of questions we'd be answering. You're asking about, but I think that more than a pro con, what I see a lot is problem solution. So this is what I heard. Am I hearing you back right? So demonstrating to your clients that you understand what they're saying, maybe even better than they do, which is something people feel often actually when you're able to show them back something that they said to you. And so I think that I would think in my experience less than like a pro con type of way, type of exercise when I'm interfacing with clients, as more of a problem solution kind of conversation.
Let's see. Do we have any other questions? Y'all can put them directly in the chat at this point or in the Q&A if you'd like.
while we're waiting, I did forget to go over this quote at the end. So this was basically to kind of, we had a little Twitter chat the other day, some of the product design crew, about sort of the same topic. And one of the things that came up over and over on like the empathy side of things was that it's a product designer's job really to be empathic and or empathetic, I'm not sure which it is, and curious. And when it's your job, all of a sudden you kind of have to be a bit of a jack of all trades. And I particularly like doing that. It's this quote from Robert Heinlein has always been really inspiring to me. The question, this is what I heard, show them back what they said to you. Uh, yeah, I think that the role that design plays is to show. And so first step is to gain confidence. Can I show back to you what you said in words to me? Can I represent back to you through something visual, or even just through a problem solution that's like, this is what you said. My solution demonstrates that I understand what your problem um, is more of the scenario that I would run into versus like this solution has these benefits and these like these pros and these cons to it. That's certainly like a thing that happens in conversations, but a pro con kind of exercise isn't something that I really engage in much.
What do you think the biggest misconception is within like the product design world, or like what people think a product designer actually is?
Yeah, I think that immediately is that product designers just kind of make things look nice. And so I think that the reason for that is because that's the visible part of their job. And I think that a lot of other jobs don't have a lot of visible aspects to it, actually. And so because we have to ship the visual stuff, people see that and think that that is basically what we do, is kind of like decorate things at the end and add the brand, if you will. I think that, in reality, product designers are researchers. They are like voracious question askers. I think that they are rigorously empathetic, and when they feel that there is a need, on the user side of things, there is an urgency and a push to solve that need. I think that honestly, the earlier that designers can get involved in the conversation around what we're going to make, the sooner they can help everybody see what we're talking about. And obviously very early on in a conversation, that's an abstraction. That might be more of like a chart or a visualization or a cartoon or something to help just bring some visual impact to what we're talking about. And so we have something visual to anchor the conversation around. Someone asked, what would be the difference between a UX UI designer and a product designer to me? I think that user experience design, user interface design is an aspect of user experience design, which is an aspect of product design, is how I see that. Product is the overall encompassing umbrella. I think that when you are talking about user experience design specifically versus UI design, user experience design is more of an empathetic lens on the user's journey. How are they experiencing all of this in terms of what they're trying to do? Not necessarily in terms of brand identity and all that, although it all plays into it. But I think that when you're working on user interface design, that is much more like design system stuff. That's creating a consistent set of buttons and form fields that are accessible and those types of things. Someone asked, Doris asked, what is the importance of a teamwork spirit, for lack of a better expression? I think that's a great expression in a product designer. Teamwork is absolutely paramount because I think, one, if you're like me, there is a teensy little aspect of art to design, right? There is something of ourselves that we're putting into this. And because that qualitative data that is sort of infusing our taste is received very subjectively, it becomes hard to detach from the outcome of that work. And so I think that great teammates put everything in on the field, right? Like think about it like a great team practicing something together. They are just, blood, sweat, and tears. But when the game's over, it's drinks with friends or whatever. So I think detaching from that outcome and being more of sort of like releasing this idea to the team, because once someone stumbles upon it, it's actually no longer yours, it's ours, because it's our work. Okay, I do want to answer this question even though we're just about out of time. Sherry asked, if I don't engage in pro con stuff much, then when there is more than one design, how might I tell which design to go with? The really funny thing is, so I love to see a variety of solutions, and I think that that's the power of a designer and really the power of a lot of modern design tools like Figma, for example. Um, I think in my experience, the conversation becomes less pro and con and more deeply understanding the context, because it becomes less about, well, if we go this way, then it has these benefits but these downsides, or if we went this way, it has these benefits or these downsides. Usually when we're talking about UX UI design, within product design, the I'm assuming if we're at the stage of looking at a couple of designs together, that that conversation it just doesn't turn out to feel like a pro con conversation. It turns out to feel more like, well, in order to believe that this design was the better direction to go, I'd have to believe that this, and this are true. On the other hand, this one would make me want to believe this, and this are true, is usually more the shape of that. Yes, more about understanding context.
Okay, well, I think that wraps it up, Matt. Thank you again for giving us the anatomy of a product designer tonight, and everybody else that zoomed in. As a reminder, you're going to receive a copy of tonight's presentation within 3 business days after our event. I dropped some links in the chat for our admissions, as well as our YouTube channel. It's where we post all of these videos after they go live. And then I also posted just our website in there if you guys are interested in attending any further events. So thank you all for coming and have an amazing night. Bye, y'all.
Bye.